President Peter, fellow Rotarians, honoured guests. I am grateful for this opportunity to speak to this conference on behalf of the enslaved children of the world, who are entitled to insist that their rights should be respected, that their welfare should be protected, and that their lives should be free from want and fear. Yet millions of these children are still forced to work in factories, in fields, in homes, in quarries, in restaurants, and in the sex trade, where they are used and abused, and for the young girls repeatedly traded on the female used body market, where they are passed from man to man like a shared cigarette, used and then all too often stubbed out. Keshenanka was a slave, a child slave who was born into bonded labour, but he was freed after 16 years of servitude. And my slide shows him receiving an anti-slavery award on behalf of all bonded labourers in India. And in accepting that award, he said this. He said, "You people who are free, who are born free, and who have always lived free, will never understand what it's like to be a slave. When I was a slave, I could never have dreamt that one day I'd be standing here talking to you as a free man. My whole world was where I was in bondage. I couldn't have imagined myself standing in front of you, as I said before, but because someone somewhere felt that I shouldn't be a slave and then did something about that, I'm now a free man, but I could never have freed myself." And he went on to say, "But you must understand that when someone tells you year after year that you have no rights to think, you stop thinking. And if they say to you, you must not cry, you stop crying." So this then is the essential ingredient of slavery, the total control of one person by another for the purpose of economic exploitation. My visits over the last 14 years to several trafficking shelters have made me realize that one of the great crimes of slavery is that it goes beyond servitude. It goes to the point of eliminating the identity of the individual. And the younger someone is taken into slavery, the less likely they are ever able to repossess their own identities. In other words, they become like zombies. It was Keshenanka's comments, "Because someone somewhere felt that I shouldn't be a slave and then did something about that," really prompted me to submit a motion on child slavery 10 years ago to the RIBI conference in Manchester. The motion was accepted on the 14th of April 2005 and was subsequently forwarded to the 2007 Council on Legislation. But it came to a juddering halt when it was deliberated by the RI board. However, RIBI support was all the encouragement that I needed to carry on the fight to gain RI's acceptance that slavery was a humanitarian issue that needed to be addressed by Rotarians. Acceptance was eventually achieved in January 2013 when the RI board finally gave its approval to an unofficial action group which I'd started in 2009. We are now a fully fledged Rotarian action group whose aims are to raise awareness and to take action. In the last 6 years, with the help of clubs and with Rotarians all over the world, many anti-slavery projects have been successfully completed for the benefit of the survivors of slavery. Almost all of the projects and project sites have been personally visited by members of the action group. And whilst I haven't got time today to share the details of any of these projects with you, they can be viewed on our website. We now have over 1,200 Rotarians in 62 countries who have signed up either as paid-up members or as supporters of the work that we're doing. But sadly, whilst we have about 220 supporters in the United Kingdom, we only have one from Ireland. So come on, you Irish Rotarians. Our rag needs your support to tackle this evil practice which Pope Francis described as the most disgracefully overlooked crime against humanity. And the charge is justified because many governments appear to be doing very little to enforce their own ratification of Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or any other anti-slavery convention. One of the problems with slavery is that most people think that it disappeared a long time ago. Nothing could be further from the truth. Making something illegal doesn't make it cease to exist. Making something illegal only causes it to vanish from view. Behind closed doors, in remote places, and right under our noses, slavery and the slave trade has continued throughout the 19th and the 20th and now the 21st centuries, making peoples rich, feeding our lifestyles, and burning up lives. Although slavery is illegal in every country in the world, there are more slaves now than ever before, an estimated 36 million. That's more than 3 times the number of people taken out of Africa during the 400 years of the Atlantic slave trade. And the majority of these are children. But there's a major difference between slaves in the past and the modern slave. Today, slavery exists in many different forms, but each of these forms shares 2 key characteristics that distinguishes them from slavery in the past. Today, slaves are cheap and they are disposable. Over the last 14 years, I have looked into the eyes and the hearts of hundreds of these survivors and felt their pain. That was why I felt compelled to form an action group of Rotarians against child slavery. One of those survivors, a boy called Gnu, worked in a stone quarry. In explaining the cruelty of his master, Ramesh Garg, he recalled one hot summer day working in the quarry. A young Dalit girl was working for the first time alongside her parents. In her innocence, she wandered from her work to play with a little kitten that had wandered into the quarry. Guno didn't notice the girl until he heard the crack of Garg's Mauser rifle. The police never investigated the incident, and the parents never filed charges. That week, the little girl's family cremated her small body. Garg paid, of course, for the death rites. He then added the cost to the family's outstanding debt. Last month, I took a small group of Rotarians from my district to visit some trafficking shelters in Nepal. But before doing so, I honored a commitment to make a presentation to the Rotary Club of Delhi Megapolis. I think, Mukesh, you know Delhi Megapolis. It's a wonderful club. Naturally, I took the opportunity to urge the members of that club to take a more active part to combat child slavery. However, I was politely reminded by one of the members that in the United Kingdom, we have a similar problem of human trafficking and slavery. And sadly, I had to admit that he was right. According to the National Crime Agency, the number of people trafficked into slavery into the United Kingdom is increasing rapidly. In 2013, the number was something like 2,700, a little over 2,700, which was an increase of 22% on the previous year. Most of the victims who have been trafficked into this country come from China, they come from Eastern Europe, they come from Nigeria, and they come from Vietnam. The Global Slavery Index estimates that there are probably about 8,000 people who are enslaved in the United Kingdom. But the Home Office reckon that that figure should be between 10 and 13,000. So once again, behind closed doors, in remote places, and right under our noses, slavery has continued in the United Kingdom because of the public's lack of awareness or apathy, because of our porous borders, and also because of the failure of past governments to tackle the problem, especially the exploitation of young girls into sex slavery, as evidenced by the high-profile cases in places like Rotary and Rochdale. Believe it or not, it was only in 2004, under the Asylum and Immigration Act, that trafficking for all forms of labour exploitation was made a criminal offence. That is 56 years after our government signed the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Amazing, isn't it? As far as forced labour is concerned, the UK government signed the 1950 European Convention against human rights, against human beings, and Article 4 of that says that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. No one shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labour. Yet, astonishingly, it was not until 2009, under the Coroners and Justice Act, that forced labour was made a criminal offence. A recent article in the Daily Telegraph tells a familiar story of exploitation into this country. This one is about a young 15-year-old Lithuanian girl who arrived in Britain expecting to work in a cafe. But as soon as she arrived in the country, her passport was taken away from her, and her escort sold her to an unnamed Albanian for £4,000. For a week, he continually raped her, and then he forced her to work in a brothel. Over a period of 18 months, Lisa was traded 8 times on the female used body market before she escaped and fled to the police, and only 3 of her slave traders were ever brought to justice. Although the Rotary Action Group has been working mainly in the United States, in Africa, Southeast Asia, particularly in places like India, Nepal and Thailand, and in Australia now, my aim is to see that the Action Group will be operating quite strongly in the United Kingdom. I've already been invited to several talks at Marsham Street in London to talk with the Home Office and with the Minister for Modern Slavery, Karen Bradley, to see how our Action Group can help her, the central government and the anti-slavery agencies to implement the new measures of the Modern Slavery Act. I've held initial discussions with the Chief Executive Officer, Paul Broadbent, of the Gangmasters Licensing Authority, and 2 days ago I held a meeting with Julie Wilson, who is the head of human trafficking in the Justice Department here in Northern Ireland. Julie tells me that last year, in August last year, 22 Romanians escaped from slavery in County Armagh. So there's a major problem in Ireland. So we need Irish Rotarians to join our action group and to help us to combat this heinous crime. I'm going to slip that one because I need to conclude. 200 years after the UK government parliament passed the abolition of the Slave Trade Act, more children than ever before languish in slavery, forced to work under threat of violence and for no pay. On the African continent, hundreds of thousands are considered chattel, and slavery is accepted as an everyday social institution, whilst on the Indian subcontinent, millions languish in generational debt bondage. Across the globe and in the United Kingdom, young girls sold for sex and labour are already the second most lucrative commodity for organised crime. Today, we Rotarians have a choice on this issue. We can either despair that exploitation is an age-old problem, that human nature will never change, and that in any case, slavery is a problem for government, and then do nothing. Or we can remember the tenets of the four-way test, part 2 of the objects of Rotary, and RI's code of policies in relation to the rights of the individual, and then do our utmost to end this evil practice. 2 key obstacles stand in the way of this objective: lack of resources and lack of awareness. In a world where most people loathe slavery, awakening their awareness will unleash great power. When we come to know that we're living in a world with slaves, that their stolen labor and lives feed into our shops, our businesses, and our homes, the urge to act will become irrepressible. And when that urge, that desire that all should be free, sweeps across our world, the end of slavery will be near. And from that desire will flow the resources needed to get the job done, and the liberators needed to help more and more slaves to walk free. Let me put it another way. The more we can increase the intelligence and the global level of the conversation deploring the evils of slavery, the more likely we're able to reach the ears, the hearts, and the minds of the stakeholders, the decision makers, as well as the slave masters and human traffickers, and the men on the streets who buy the girls. Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We must avoid that task. If we are neutral in situations of injustice, we have already chosen the side of the oppressor." Finally, I have to say to you, as Rotarians, we have a responsibility to end this obnoxious crime against humanity once and for all. If you think that you are too small to make an impact, try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. But our small actions, however small, can be magnified if they are coordinated with the actions of others. One person jumping up and down won't make an earthquake, but if we all jump together, the effect would be impossible to ignore. So let's all start jumping together as Rotarians and members of the Rotarian Action Group with the message, gulf the world with the message, let's put an end to slavery as we have almost done with polio. Thank you.